In the world of professional wrestling, few stars have ever burned as brightly, as intensely, or as colorfully as Macho Man Randy Savage. He was a walking, talking explosion of neon tassels, sequined robes, and a voice that sounded like it gargled gravel and lightning. With a gravity-defying flying elbow drop and promos that were pure, uncut, chaotic energy, he became more than just a wrestler. He was a cultural icon. His catchphrase, "Oh yeah," became the battle cry for a generation. He climbed to the absolute peak of the industry, capturing world championships and headlining the grandest stage of them all, WrestleMania. But we're not here to talk about the glory. This isn't a story about championships or iconic Slim Jim commercials. This is the story of what happens when the on-screen madness is real. It's about what happens when the intensity that fuels a character starts to consume the man playing him. Because behind the roar of the crowd, a much darker, more tragic story was unfolding. This is the tale of a legend consumed by his own demons, a man whose obsessive control, volcanic jealousy, and bitter feuds led to his own exile from the very industry he helped build. This is the tragic story of Randy Poffo, the man who became the Macho Man, and the dark side of a career that shone so brightly it was destined to burn out. On April 5, 1992, at WrestleMania 8, Randy Savage stood triumphant, holding the WWF Championship high after a grueling and emotional battle with Ric Flair. It was the comeback story of a lifetime, a return to the top for one of the industry's most beloved figures. He had the title, the adoration of millions, and his first love, Miss Elizabeth, back by his side. It should have been the start of a glorious new chapter. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Just over 2 years later, Savage was gone from the WWF, not with a grand farewell, but with a quiet, confusing exit. For the next decade and a half, it was as if he never existed. The company he helped turn into a global empire seemed determined to erase him from its history. His name was forbidden. His legendary matches were ignored. What on earth went so wrong? The answer is a story of paranoia, betrayal, and a downward spiral that started long before he ever reached the top. To understand the darkness that would later define Randy Savage's career, you have to go back to the very beginning of his time in the WWF. When Randy Poffo, the son of wrestler Angelo Poffo, arrived in 1985, he was an immediate standout. He wasn't just another muscle-bound brawler. He was a meticulous athlete, a man obsessed with perfection. He brought with him an intensity that was, frankly, a little scary. And he brought with him Elizabeth Hewlett, a telegenic young woman he'd met at a gym in Kentucky. Vince McMahon, with his uncanny eye for talent, saw the potential immediately. Savage became the Macho Man, a hot commodity chased by every manager in the promotion. But Savage introduced his own manager, the beautiful and graceful Miss Elizabeth. Right from the start, their on-screen dynamic was clear. He was the snarling, aggressive heel, and she was the poised, often frightened damsel. Fans adored Elizabeth, and through her, they learned to despise the way Savage would hide behind her or berate her. It was brilliant, classic wrestling storytelling. But it was also uncomfortably real. The first major storyline to expose this was Savage's feud with George the Animal Steele in 1986. Steele, a simple-minded, childlike character, became infatuated with Miss Elizabeth. On screen, this drove Savage into a jealous rage, leading to a series of intensely personal matches. Off-screen, however, the lines were already blurring. George Steele, a happily married family man in real life, later recalled how Savage's on-screen jealousy was frighteningly authentic. Steele noted that Savage's anger didn't always stop when the cameras went off. He was protective to an extreme, his mind seemingly unable to separate performance from reality. This wasn't just an act, it was a window into the soul of Randy Poffo. The Macho Man persona wasn't just a character he played, it was an amplification of the obsessive, controlling man he was becoming. The very things making him a superstar, his intensity and his all-consuming focus, were the same demons festering behind the scenes. And with Miss Elizabeth at the center of it all, the stage was set for a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. By 1987, Randy Savage was a certified superstar. He had captured the prestigious Intercontinental Championship in a classic match against Tito Santana on February 8, 1986, and defended it in what many still call one of the greatest matches ever, against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. His star was rising fast, but it was his pairing with the only man in the stratosphere above him that would launch him into immortality: Hulk Hogan. The formation of the Mega Powers in late 1987 was a stroke of booking genius. Hogan, the ultimate good guy, saved Savage from a beatdown, and with Miss Elizabeth beaming at their side, the two biggest stars in the universe joined forces. They were an unstoppable dream team, selling out arenas and dominating pay-per-views. For a year, they ruled the wrestling world, culminating with Savage, with Hogan in his corner, winning the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 4. It was the peak of his career. But the very thing that made the storyline so compelling was also the seed of its real-life destruction: Savage's all-consuming pathological jealousy over Miss Elizabeth. The on-screen story was that Hogan was getting a little too friendly, a little too protective of Elizabeth, and it was driving Savage insane. Hogan would celebrate with her, carry her to the back, and Savage would watch, his eyes burning with suspicion. The tension simmered for months, building with subtle moments like when Hogan accidentally eliminated Savage from the 1989 Royal Rumble. This wasn't just a wrestling angle, it was art imitating a toxic reality. Backstage, Savage's paranoia was spiraling. He truly believed that Hogan, his friend and partner, was trying to steal his wife. His obsessive behavior was now magnified under the white-hot spotlight of the main event. He would reportedly lock Elizabeth in dressing rooms to keep her away from other wrestlers, his temper flaring at the slightest perceived glance. The on-screen explosion finally happened on February 3, 1989, during a live primetime special, The Main Event. During a match, Elizabeth was knocked unconscious at ringside. Hogan carried her to the back for medical attention, abandoning Savage in the ring. When Hogan returned, Savage slapped him across the face. The Mega Powers were no more. Later, in the backstage medical area, the world witnessed a tirade that felt terrifyingly real. Savage, screaming at Hogan, accused him of having jealous eyes and trying to steal both his title and his woman, before brutally attacking him with the championship belt. The line between Randy Savage the character and Randy Poffo the man had completely dissolved. His greatest professional achievement was a direct reflection of his deepest personal torment. The feud culminated at WrestleMania 5, where Hogan defeated Savage for the WWF Championship, but the animosity was far from over. Savage reportedly developed a real-life hatred for Hogan, a deep-seated grudge that would follow both men for the rest of Savage's life. He had reached the top of the mountain, but his paranoia had just pushed him right off the edge. While the implosion of the Mega Powers played out for millions on television, the true horror story was happening away from the cameras. The relationship between Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, presented as wrestling's greatest love story, was actually a deeply troubled and toxic ordeal, all thanks to Savage's suffocating control. Though they had married in December 1984, long before their on-screen match made in heaven, their life together was anything but. Colleagues from that era paint a chilling picture. He wasn't just protective, he was possessive to an almost pathological degree. Wrestlers like George Steele and Jake the Snake Roberts have described Savage as one of the most intensely jealous men they had ever met. The stories are consistent and disturbing. Randy would lock Elizabeth in dressing rooms or locker rooms, sometimes for hours, just to keep her from talking to anyone. He would scream at crew members, other wrestlers, even fans who he felt looked at her the wrong way. The grueling WWF road schedule, combined with the party lifestyle of the 80s, only made things worse. Elizabeth, who was naturally shy and quiet, felt increasingly isolated. According to Hulk Hogan's ex-wife Linda, who was close friends with Elizabeth, Savage's control was absolute. He needed to know where she was at all times, creating an atmosphere of constant surveillance and fear. The ultimate irony came at SummerSlam 1991. On screen, the two had an emotional reunion after Savage lost a retirement match, and their subsequent on-air wedding was billed as the match made in heaven. It was a beautiful, tear-jerking moment for fans. In reality, it was a facade masking a marriage that was already completely broken. The end came just a year later, in the summer of 1992. Elizabeth had finally had enough. She fled their home and sought refuge with the Hogans in Florida, leaving without even telling Randy where she was going. The divorce was finalized soon after. Savage was reportedly devastated, and in his mind, the blame fell squarely on Hulk Hogan, who he accused of helping his wife leave him. This belief cemented a real-life hatred that would persist for decades, fueling rumors of a backstage fight where Savage gave Hogan a black eye right before WrestleMania 9, a story Hogan has always denied, claiming it was a jet ski accident. The love story that had captivated millions was a lie. It was a story of obsession, control, and profound unhappiness, where the lines between performance and real-life abuse were tragically blurred. By 1993, the wrestling landscape was changing. The boom of the 80s was fading, and Vince McMahon was looking to his new generation of younger stars like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Randy Savage, now in his early 40s, was being phased out of the main event. Despite having won the world title just a year prior, Vince moved him from the ring to the commentary booth, seeing him as an elder statesman for the company. For Randy Savage, it was a profound insult. He was a performer to his core and believed he still had years left as a top competitor. Watching younger talent take his spot from behind a desk was a bitter pill to swallow. As he saw other veterans like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair getting main event runs in the rival promotion, WCW, the frustration grew. In late 1994, with his WWF contract expiring, Savage made a decision that would permanently burn his bridge with Vince McMahon. He jumped ship to WCW. Vince McMahon took the departure personally. On an episode of Monday Night Raw, he delivered a bizarrely emotional farewell to Savage, wishing him luck, a courtesy almost never extended to defectors. But behind the scenes, McMahon was reportedly deeply hurt by what he saw as a betrayal from a man he considered a friend. This feeling was likely compounded by a significant financial blow. Savage was the iconic face of Slim Jim, and when he went to WCW, the massive sponsorship deal went with him, a major loss for the WWF during a tough financial period. This perceived betrayal became the most public explanation for why Savage was effectively blacklisted from the WWF. While other major stars who defected, Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, were eventually welcomed back, Savage remained an outcast. Vince, a man famous for doing business with his biggest rivals, drew a line in the sand with the Macho Man. This unprecedented exile fueled one of the most toxic rumors in wrestling history, that the real reason for the fallout was an alleged inappropriate relationship between Savage and a teenage Stephanie McMahon. This urban legend has been perpetuated for decades online, but there has never been any credible, verifiable evidence to support it. It's widely dismissed by insiders as a fan theory created to explain the sheer intensity of Vince's grudge. The more plausible explanation remains one of deep personal and professional betrayal. In Vince's eyes, Savage had lied to him, and for that, there was no forgiveness. Randy Savage's arrival in WCW in December 1994 was a huge get for the company. He immediately re-entered the main event scene, reigniting his legendary rivalries with Ric Flair and, of course, Hulk Hogan. For a time, it seemed like the move had paid off. He was wrestling again, he was a top star, and he would go on to capture the WCW World Heavyweight Championship 4 times. His run in WCW definitely proved he had plenty left in the tank. However, the change of scenery did little to exorcise his personal demons. The paranoia and jealousy that defined him in the WWF followed him south. Though he and Elizabeth were divorced, he brought her into WCW in 1996, briefly reuniting their on-screen partnership. But even with a new woman in his life, Gorgeous George, the old patterns of control reportedly re-emerged. It was said that Savage actively blocked her from pursuing her own wrestling training, terrified that if she gained independence in the business, she would leave him, just as Elizabeth had. Professionally, his WCW tenure was a mixed bag. He was a key figure in the iconic New World Order (NWO) storyline, but he often found himself playing second fiddle to Hollywood Hogan. Creative decisions often undercut his momentum. In 1999, after finally winning the world title again, he was booked to lose it to Hogan the very next night, making him look like a transitional champion at best. As the late 90s wore on, the years of high-impact wrestling took their toll. Injuries piled up, and his appearances became more sporadic. After WCW folded, his career essentially ended. He had a bizarre foray into music, releasing a rap album in 2003 titled Be a Man, which featured a diss track aimed squarely at Hulk Hogan. He made one final brief wrestling appearance in TNA in late 2004, but it was an underwhelming end to an incredible in-ring career. The WCW years gave him the validation he craved, but they also marked a steady decline from his WWF peak. Savage became an increasingly isolated figure, forever on the outside looking in at the empire he helped build. As the years went by, WWE began celebrating its history with the Hall of Fame. One by one, the legends of the 80s took their place. Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, Ric Flair, Bret Hart. Yet one name remained conspicuously absent: Randy Savage. For over a decade, the company he helped carry acted as though he didn't exist. This deliberate omission was the clearest sign of the deep and unresolved grudge held by Vince McMahon. The reasons were the subject of endless speculation. Was it just because he left for WCW? That didn't add up, since so many others were welcomed back. Was it the toxic Stephanie McMahon rumor? Many fans clung to this theory as the only explanation for such a lasting excommunication. Another story was that Savage himself had refused induction unless his entire family, his father Angelo and brother Lanny Poffo, were inducted with him. Whatever the real reason, one of the greatest performers in history was denied his place among the immortals while he was still alive. In a deeply personal and mocking series of skits, WWE had even created a character called the Macho Man to make fun of Savage's age. The message from his former boss was clear. The tragedy was compounded by the fate of Miss Elizabeth. After their time in WCW, her life spiraled into drug abuse. On May 1, 2003, Elizabeth Hewlett died of an accidental overdose of painkillers and alcohol. She was only 42. The news reportedly devastated Savage. The woman whose life had been so painfully tied to his was gone. In the years that followed, Savage largely retreated from public life. He remarried and lived quietly in Florida, far from the wrestling world. There was no reconciliation with WWE. There was no final run, no Hall of Fame speech. Shortly before his death, there were signs of a thaw, as he had finally signed on to appear in a WWE video game. But a full reconciliation never happened. The Cold War between Vince McMahon and Randy Savage would last until the very end. On the morning of May 20th, 2011, Randy Poffo was driving his Jeep Wrangler in Florida with his wife Lynn by his side. He suddenly suffered a massive heart attack, lost control of the vehicle, and crashed into a tree. He was 58 years old. The Macho Man was gone. His death brought his complicated legacy into sharp focus. There was no denying his genius. His magnetic charisma, ahead-of-its-time style, and legendary promos made him one of the all-time greats. But that brilliance was forever linked to the darkness that consumed him. His legacy is also a warning. It's a story of how a performer's intensity, the very engine of his success, can become a destructive force. His paranoia and jealousy didn't just fuel storylines, they destroyed his most important relationships. His feud with Hulk Hogan wasn't just business, it was over a decade of real, palpable hatred. Though Hogan has claimed the two reconciled shortly before Savage's death, the story has been met with skepticism. a final, ambiguous chapter in their bitter history. It's the story of how easy it is to get lost when the lines between character and reality blur. Randy Savage didn't just play the Macho Man. In many ways, he was the Macho Man, driven by an obsessive need for control that ultimately alienated those closest to him. In 2015, 4 years after his death, Randy Macho Man Savage was finally inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. His brother Lanny accepted the honor on his behalf. It was a long overdue recognition, but also a bittersweet one. The man himself never got to stand on that stage, never got to hear the roar of the crowd one last time, and never made peace with the company he gave so much of his life to. The story of Randy Savage is the ultimate wrestling tragedy. He was a visionary and an artist whose canvas was the squared circle. The macho madness he unleashed upon the world built an empire of iconic moments for millions of fans. But that same madness, born from insecurity and jealousy, ultimately consumed the man himself. He was a tragic hero in the truest sense, a man of immense talent whose greatest strengths were also his most fatal flaws. His story is a stark cautionary tale about the high price of fame in a business that so often demands its stars sacrifice their true selves for the persona. The Macho Man will forever be remembered as a legend, but the ghost of Randy Poffo is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the brightest of lights. A star who shone so intensely he collapsed under his own weight. What is your favorite Macho Man Randy Savage moment? Was it his epic match with Ricky Steamboat, the explosion of the Mega Powers, or his emotional reunion with Miss Elizabeth? Let us know down in the comments. And if you learned something new about the hidden struggles behind the legend, snap into that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the dark side of wrestling history.